So, there's a book, I think, that somebody came out and said, someone would talk. Hey, none of this can be true because someone would talk and it would all come out. Well, some people did. And that's why we've had a mass murder of the witnesses and the investigators in this assassination. 50 to 70 witnesses, depending upon how you want to define material knowledge, have been found dead of unnatural causes within 15 years of assassination. 50 to 70 witnesses. 18 material witnesses within 3 years of the assassination have been killed. Here's one that's very disturbing, though, to me. 6 FBI agents who investigated the assassination were killed within 6 months, period, in 77, just before they testified before the House Select Committee on Assassinations. I'm not talking about 6 FBI agents in the whole country, 6 FBI agents who investigated the assassination. There weren't that many. 6 out of what? I don't know, dozens? 100? 200? 3 top mafia bosses also killed at that same time frame, 1977, that same 6-month time frame, when the House Select Committee wanted to investigate this because the Warren Commission had proven to be so fraudulent. So the odds of all of this being an accident are over 700,000 trillion to 1, more than the grains of sand on the earth. Could not possibly be a coincidence.
Who's the 2 guys?
I'm sorry, Johnny Rosselli was one of the guys, and Sam Giancana. These were the 2 mafia heads who were killed. Good question, Bill. And then the other one is Charles Nicoletti, who was the top mafia assassin in the United States, who many believe may have been one of the ones on the Grassy Knoll, or at least in the area firing some of the shots. Also on the Grassy Knoll, these 3 tramps were arrested. We don't have any record of their investigation. But it sure does seem strange to me that they look an awful like Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis. We talked about Frank Sturgis, the CIA agent who was involved in the anti-Castro movement. You can decide if these are the same guys, but it's coincidence that the anti-Castro community was so much against Kennedy, and these guys were heading that up. Hunt was heading that up, and Sturgis deeply involved, and these 2 guys that look exactly like them are tramps that were found behind the Grassy Knoll in the railroad tracks. They were arrested, and we have no record of their arrest. So the only reason that the Dallas police would have no record of their arrest is if they have some kind of federal connection to an organization like the CIA or the FBI. So, let's finally get down, we're just about finished up here. What would be the revenge motive? Lots of people were involved in this assassination, either in the cover-up or not. I think I'm going to skip ahead. Let me skip and come back to there. So here's what we know so far. So LBJ, he started the Warren Commission cover-up. He was responsible for that, and the body tampering on Air Force One. Hoover oversaw the material alteration of evidence, the testimony. He even, when he presented the Zapruder film to the Warren Commission, had actually presented it with the 2 frames, I think it was 314 and 315 reversed, so that Kennedy's head would appear to have fallen forward from the shot and not backwards. They caught that. James Angleton, likely the Mossad double agent, was responsible for the Oswald project, we believe. Now, can't prove that. The Joint Chiefs of Staff oversaw the most ridiculed autopsy in world history. The Mafia killed Oswald to cover up the truth. They worked with the Oswald imposter, Ruby did, to frame Oswald. The anti-Castro Cubans were involved in logistics support. But the CIA, I believe, was the primary instigator of the assassination. They had to want it to happen, and they had the means to make it happen. I would think that they were the primary, and generally most researchers today, I know you hear that there's all kinds of crazy theories out there, but most researchers today, serious researchers, all agree that it was the CIA at that time who was behind the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Obviously, the other people like LBJ played a key role. Well, it's important to also remember that the CIA was established in 1947 with the National Security Act by Wall Street lawyers.
Yes, sir.
Right. This organization's allegiance was not really to the president, in my opinion. It was to
Central banks.
The central banks.
The banks.
The central banks. And in fact, the lawyer who helped draw that up, the Nash Act, was Clark Clifford. Clark Clifford was deeply involved in the BCCI scandal that many of you might be aware of.
What's that stand for?
Bank of Crooks and Criminals, Bank of Commerce and Credit, Incorporated, BCCI. A whole story in itself. So let's go back. If the CIA was involved in this, why would they want to kill John F. Kennedy? Basically, they wanted to invade Cuba. We talked about this after the Bay of Pigs invasion. The Bay of Pigs was Kennedy. I don't know how deep we want to go into that, but the plot was that the CIA had to bomb the airfields to keep Castro's planes from getting up and stopping the invasion at the Bay of Pigs.
They did?
The bombing was unsuccessful. They did not, they wanted to make another run. Kennedy did not want that. So he refused the airport. We actually found out it wasn't Kennedy that refused the airport, it was George Bundy, his national security advisor, who refused it. We don't even know for sure if Kennedy actually refused it. But in any case, that's what happened at the Bay of Pigs. The freighters that were used for the Bay of Pigs invasion were George H.W. Bush's freighters, the Barbara and the Houston. They came from his organization Zapata Petroleum. Lots of CIA operatives and things have claimed that Zapata Petroleum was a front for drug operations running out of the Caribbean. We'll talk more about that in a minute. How many folks, did I ask how many folks know about the Operation Northwoods document? A must read, an absolute must read. The title is Justification for Military Intervention in Cuba. And essentially the Joint Chiefs of Staff were recommending that they commit terrorist acts against people in the United States in Miami in order to blame Cuba and so that they could invade. Does this sound familiar today? Isn't that what's been going on in the last 10 years in the Middle East? Let's create a terrorist act so that we can, or they'll invent one. Assad killing his own people, Hussein killing his own people, all this other stuff. Milosevic killing his own people. It always goes on. There's always some kind of act going on that justifies an invasion. So Kennedy had demoted Lyman Lemnitzer, the head of Joint Chiefs of Staff chair, who some question may also have been a double agent for Mossad. We don't know that for sure. He fired all the directors, a ton of people in the CIA. He fired the CIA director, Alan Dulles, the deputy of plans director, Richard Bissell, CIA deputy Charles Cabell. Charles Cabell's brother was Earl Cabell, the mayor of Dallas on the day John F. Kennedy died.
Say that again.
JFK fired Charles Cabell in the CIA over the Bay of Pigs. Charles Cabell's brother, Earl, was the mayor in Dallas on the day that John F. Kennedy died. He had ultimate control over the parade route, or had a lot of control over that parade route. Not ultimate.
There's a picture.
That is Lyman Lemnitzer, the Joint Chief. He was the proposer of the Operation Northwoods. That's the guy. So, let's consider the aftermath. Now it's going to get even more ugly. After the JFK death, many of you remember that LBJ falsely claimed that we were attacked by Vietnam in the Gulf of Tonkin. And we passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution to invade Vietnam.
Never happened.
Never happened. Admiral Stockdale and many others is now fairly common knowledge that the Gulf of Tonkin incident never happened. Vietnam never tried to attack our ships. And yet Johnson escalated that from 17,000 advisors, so-called, that Kennedy had, to 550,000 troops, and 50,000 men of our guys died or came home or became missing actors or either came back in a box. So, here's where it starts to get really ugly. So, Colonel Bo Brights went on a DIA mission, Defense Intelligence mission, to find some of these people, POW, MIA. He was going to recover some of the bodies. The Defense Intelligence Agency had asked Ross Perot to head on that. He, in turn, got another Colonel, Bull Simons, who in turn got Colonel Bo Brights to go on the POW MIA recovery mission. When Grice was over there, he discovered, and I've got a whole other slides on this, but I don't have time to go into. General Kunsaw was running the largest heroin operation in the world out of Burma. They were running the drugs through Laos, Cambodia, to get them out and distribute it. Grice discovered this. He videotaped Kunsaw's men. Kunsaw wanted to convert the operation into a legitimate crop operation, but he needed U.S. government assistance. Well, the U.S. didn't want to do that because we're looking at a multi-billion-dollar drug operation where the money is going covertly into our own government agencies. So these drugs were being shipped. But anyway, Kunsaw, they got them on video, and they acknowledged who the players were in the United States. Specifically, they said CIA Ted Shackley, who reports directly at that time and had for years reported directly to George H.W. Bush, and Richard Armitage, who was at that time the Secretary of Defense. He was later the Secretary of State under George W. The heroin was going into Santos Trafficante, who we talked about earlier, the head of the Florida gang, and that was distributed throughout the United States. So the motive, I contend, for going into Vietnam was not to fight communism. It was to establish control of worldwide heroin operations. And that's pretty ugly. And Kennedy did not want to go into Vietnam. And we were talking about a multi-billion-dollar operation that was going to go out the window. And it only took one bullet to fix it.
Here's some pictures.
Ted Shackley, Richard Armitage.
Okay.
That's an older picture and a more recent picture of Armitage, because this guy's still in the government. He was still in the government under George W. So,
Garland, if the reason for going into Vietnam was primarily motivated by the CIA.
Can we save the questions till after the presentation?
Okay.
actually, I'll tell you what. We'll start with you. I've only got one last question. One last slide. 2 slides. So let's just recap. George H.W.'s fingerprints are all over this as well. He had the freighters and the anti-Castro Cuban movement. Oswald's Hammer had his personal contact information, George Moore. He oversaw Barry Seal's South American drug trafficking ops as vice president. That was coming in through his national security advisor, Donald Gregg. Ollie North, who was once one of my heroes, was actually indicted as well for drug trafficking in Costa Rica, as I found out later. Ted Shackley Bush was over that operation as well as Operation Watchtower in South America. He was confronted by Ross Perot about the Southeast Asian operations. When Perot found out that Armitage was involved and Shackley, Perot went to H.W. First he went and confronted Armitage. Armitage is about 300 pounds, Perot's about like that. So Perot's mad because the DIA had told him to fund the POW-MIA operation, and the POW-MIAs would never have been, they would never uncover any because they would expose drug trafficking operations. So because the POWs and MIAs were over there, would probably know about it. So there was no chance of any POW-MIAs ever being found. So Oswald, Perot goes to Bush and confronts Bush about it. Bush says, go see the proper authorities. Well, he was the proper authority because his vice president, Executive Order 12333, put him in charge of all covert operations in America after the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan in 1981.
Was he temporarily president? That he wrote that executive order, or did he write it as VP?
They got Reagan to sign it in the hospital bed. So I don't think he was temporarily president. You remember, who was it that said he was in charge? Alexander Haig. Alexander said, I'm in charge here. I don't think Bush was ever in
Sworn
charge.
in.
But since we're on the subject, Hinckley, the assassin, the guy who attempted to assassinate Hinckley. John Hinckley and Scott Hinckley, his brother was having dinner with Neil Bush on that night. It's been confirmed by both the Colorado Rocky News, Neil Bush admits it, and the Miami Herald. They were having dinner on the evening of the assassination, and their father was a huge contributor into H.W.'s campaign, so H.W. would have benefited tremendously if Reagan had not come back to life. And if you remember, they attempted to get Reagan to Bethesda Naval Hospital, where the Kennedy assassination was covered up. But his people refused and took him to a hospital in Washington, D.C. Probably saved his life.
Who did you say was having dinner?
Neil Bush was having dinner with Scott Hinckley. Scott Hinckley was John Hinckley's brother. Neil Bush admits it. You know, there's no dispute about this on the eve of the assassination.
Was he a brother to H.W.?
Neil Bush.
Neil's a W's brother.
Yes.
I think Neil's W and Jeff's brother. Yeah, he's a son.
So how did Perot stay alive?
So Perot doesn't have first-hand evidence. Perot goes to Bush, confronts him. Bush says, go see the proper authorities. Perot was so mad. This is why Perot ran against Bush. If you remember in 1992, we were saying, why is Perot running? Why does he keep attacking Bush when Clinton is no angel himself? He's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Well, Perot was extracting revenge for the POW-MIAs that were left behind because of the drug trafficking operation. Now, Perot will probably not admit this. If you confronted him and said that, I doubt if he would admit it, but I think that it's obvious.
He'd probably give you a little smirk.
Right. He'd give you a little smirk and not answer. He wouldn't deny it, but he wouldn't admit it. So basically what we've got here is a secret society, and I'll leave you with this last quote from John F. Kennedy, and I'll read it to you, and I'll blow it up next time because I know y'all have seen about it. Kennedy says this shadow government system we have, it's a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. And no expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. That is where we are today.
He made that statement shortly before he was killed, and I saw it on YouTube or something, and I go, that's the reason he was killed.
Bill,
Exactly. I'm done.